Our next speaker is Dyer. Joe is a purpose-driven leader who is passionate about three things: people, innovation, and making a positive difference. As president of DISHER, a nationally recognized engineering and consulting firm that's headquartered here in Zeeland, Michigan, Joe guides the organization with a culture-centric approach that balances mission, profit, and growth. He started with DISHER in 2013 as an engineer, which led to a variety of leadership roles. In 2019, he stepped away and into a ministry role as executive pastor of his church. He returned to DISHER in 2001, where he now holds the role of president. Under his leadership, they have achieved record growth, profitability, and community impact. Notably, in 2023, DISHER acquired Leading by Design, a leader development organization which has expanded DISHER's offerings in leadership, training, and development. Outside of work, Joe is actively involved in serving his community and in various ministries. Please welcome Joe Dyer.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if you caught that or not, but I time traveled. I came back to DISHER in 2021. I'd love to share a little bit of that story, not 2001. So, well, it is a blessing and an honor to be asked to share here. And Virgil, my goodness, I just want to be your friend. I mean, I want to be your friend. I know people don't, Kids Hope doesn't know your name. Some of the students don't know your name, but my family has been blessed by Kids Hope over the years. My grandmother, she's passed away now. She mentored for many years, and I was her prayer partner. And I was also a mentor during my time at church, so thank you for the work that you do. Well, I do believe also that one person can make a difference. And I see myself as kind of an average Joe, so to speak, and I want to just start today by telling, thank you, the dad... The dad jokes, the father funnies will continue. I want you to know that. So that's the first of many, so buckle up, okay? Average Joe, another average Joe. You guys are going to know this story. Most of you will know this story, but if you don't know the story, I'm going to share it with you. This average Joe, he grew up in a large family. He was part of the family business. He was part of a large household. He had many brothers. He was his father's favorite. Okay? He was the youngest. I'm the youngest too, okay? I don't know about father's favorite, but I'm the youngest too. He was his father's favorite, and his brothers did not like that. He was a little bit confident, he was a little bit arrogant, he was a little bit too confident for his own good. And so his brothers, as happens in a family like this, with family dynamics, when you're working in a family business, when you're working in a ministry, when you're working in a nonprofit, if you work with your family like that, there's always going to be a sense of, maybe some friction, some conflict, just like any other business. But in this one, that resentment boiled over. And so they sold Joe out. They sold him literally out. Okay? They cast him off. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. Story of Joseph from Genesis. It's a powerful story. He was betrayed. He was sold out of his business. He was sent away, betrayed by his brothers. And he was sent away to Egypt, to a place where he was an immigrant. He didn't know the language. He was sold into slavery. And against all odds, in his story, God was at work. God was at work. So he's young, he's talented, he had a lot of skills, but he was alone in a foreign land, and he didn't know the language. He didn't know what he was going to do. But God had a plan. God was working, and he eventually became, through some miraculous circumstances, the steward of a household to a wealthy man. And this is great. It's a great turn in the story. Against all natural odds, he thrived. He was the steward of a household. But then, obviously, we know with Potiphar's wife, he was accused of a crime he didn't commit, and he's thrown out again. He's thrown into this other pit. He's thrown into another pit. Another blow. Another tension in the story. Another forgotten situation where he's forgotten. He's thrown away. first by his brothers, then by his employer, another blow. But, in prison, it's a miraculous story, second half of Genesis, I encourage you to go read it. In prison, he's called up, he interprets a dream from Pharaoh, and all of a sudden he's just promoted to the chief steward of the land, to prime minister. So he's the chief steward of all of Egypt. From nothing, not knowing the language, being alone, he's the chief steward, second only to the king. And so many years later, we know the story, famine hits. Famine hits, and all of a sudden, he's in a position to make a difference. He's in a position to make a difference. And I always wonder of him trusting that story, what that was like to see how God was moving. Did he doubt God's faithfulness in that moment? Did he lean into those tensions in that moment? And what was that like when all of a sudden one day his brothers show up? The people that betrayed him showed up. What would you do in that situation? What would you do? He trusted the story. He trusted God's story in his life. And he forgave his brothers. He forgave his brothers. Despite all the setbacks, the betrayals, the false accusations, he forgave his brothers. And because of that, because of all those betrayals, those setbacks, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, because of all of that, he was in a position to change the course of history with his brothers. And we know how that went on from there. So Joseph's story, God's story through Joseph, is powerful. So one thing I want you to hear in just sharing a little bit of my own story is to be able to trust God's story in the midst of all those setbacks. Amen? So I want to talk a little bit more about that today, and I want to introduce myself. I'm going to share a little bit of my story. I'm going to give you a framework for what it means to lead out of that steward mindset like Joseph did. And then I'm going to share a little bit about what it means to trust God's story. Okay, so I work for a great company called DISHER. A lot of you know DISHER, and a great intro there. We also, one of our brands is Leading by Design. And this is actually really close to our mission statement of one person can make a difference. Our mission statement is to make a positive difference. So we love being involved in the community. Our team there, working at Habitat. Actually, I think we were at Habitat there and then also the ODC up there. So we love getting involved. We love giving back to our community, and we love to leave the world better than we found it through these relationships. So what we do, we deliver people, product, process, performance solutions. So we deliver engineering solutions, talent and recruitment, and then also leadership and leadership development, service and consulting as well. And so it's my passion to do a little bit of everything, and I'd love to share a little bit more about that and my career growth too. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share. So this is, again, the point of our day. One person can make a difference. And this is just me. This is just one person. So stewarding DISHER in the role of president, and that's how I see my role, as one of a steward. I try to protect and to grow the assets of DISHER in the same way that Joseph did. Here's my family. This is my first chief stewardship, is my family here. So my wife, Stephanie, a few things that we like to do there with our family, our two boys, is work on the house and things like that. It was funny, I was telling my wife, I was showing her a couple of slides. She goes, "Work around the house?" She goes, "You don't work around the house?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do. Come on." Come on. My boys there, Ezra, two good Bible names too, which we love. Ezra and Abram is 10. These next pictures, I want you to know, these next pictures, this is a moment of vulnerability on these next pictures here. So the next slide, so stay with me, okay? Next pictures. Let me explain a couple of these. So Travis Williams, when he was talking about Travis Land, he shared a few things about when he was in 8th grade. This is me in 8th grade with Stephanie up on the top left. So we were not only high school sweethearts, but darn near middle school sweethearts. So we've been together for a long time, and that was our first date together, our dance there. For Ezra and Abram, you'll notice there Abram on the left, Ezra on the right. Obviously, it's clear they get their hair from me. And they're just great great boys, and I'm really thankful for Stephanie. Stephanie stays home, does an amazing job as the steward of our household. She's the missionary of our household at home. And this is us just having some fun. We love to travel, and this is really what drives me. So with that, I also have done a couple other things. So done a number of other things here. My degree's in aeronautical engineering. I've done manufacturing, process, had the privilege, and I really mean that, the privilege to serve in many of the organizations in this room and to work on technical projects and things like that, and also on leadership. And so I thank you for that. And you're probably wondering for these, like, how do they all fit together? Because that's quite a story. So I want to share a little bit about how God has used, has really, kicking and screaming, has used my own story a little bit and been able to show me what it means to be a steward leader. So it's only God and through his story that I stand before you today. So there's really three ways I'd like to share with you about how one person can make a difference. So it's really through your story, and I'm going to share my story. You have your story. Through steward leadership, and I'm going to give you a framework. We'll spend most of the time there on this idea of steward leadership, and then a short bit at the end, trusting his story. So through your story. So one of my beliefs, and I mentioned it earlier, one of my beliefs is that anywhere you're living, anything that you're doing, you're living on mission. And you have a mission and a purpose for where you're at right now in your life. And so this is a little bit of my story. I'm not going to read all of it, but I believe that whether it's my wife, Stephanie, living missionally at home as a mom, or maybe you're working as a manager at Meyer, you're still living missionally. Or maybe you're working as a missionary through Kids Hope, or overseas in Myanmar, wherever it might be. I believe that living missionally is core to living out purpose. It's core to what you're doing every single day. So a little bit of this, I did not go to Hope College. Seems like a lot of people went to Hope College. I did not go to Hope College. Western Michigan, any Western Michigan in here? Go Broncos. Go Broncos. Thank you. A few of you in here. But this is my career journey here. So I was at Western Michigan, aeronautical engineering, Parker Hannafin, great company, worked there for a number of years, came to DISHER. And you can see there the tension here in this slide is that in 2019, as it was shared in the bio, 2019, there was a tension in the story, a discernment. Maybe not in the same way that Joseph had a tension in his story, but it was a tension. There was a tension underneath how God was working in my own story. And that tension was, my wife and I were both involved in ministry, especially church ministry. So we led young adult ministry for a lot of years. Young Life was mentioned earlier. We did Young Life. We loved working with young adults. And we were involved with a church plant and a number of ministries while we were down in Kalamazoo. And eventually, my wife was on staff at the church that we were at in Kalamazoo. And there was always this tension of what it meant to be a missionary, what it meant to serve on mission. And I had this going personally, and I also had it going professionally. And then the Lord used that tension and kind of gave me an opportunity that I was not seeking, did not look for it, but he said, pray about it. And so I prayed about it. And it was this calling to the church and to ministry. And so I wonder, and I'll share a little bit about this in a second, I wonder for you, in a room like this, with many people who love the Lord, who are working in business, who are working in ministries, but especially for those of you, speaking specifically to those of you who are working in business, I want to encourage you that you're on mission. You're on mission, working in business, okay? The fact that I left, went to church, to my church to preach, and I was the executive pastor of my church, and then I'll get to the point where I came back to where the position I'm in now, in the role I steward, that doesn't mean that you're not on mission. All of this, for me, and my calling was pastoral ministry, and it still is. And it still is. So, as was said in, actually it's 2019, there's a little typo, to June 2021, served as the executive pastor of my church. That was a cool honor. I was able to preach Easter. That was a massive honor for me. It was an amazing time. It was also a leadership pressure cooker. You notice the years there? What was going on in those years there? Nothing much. There was, let's see, I wrote it down. There was, COVID. There was an election in there. I don't know if you remember that, and a few things going on with that election. There was all kinds of civil, social things going on. I mean, it was a wild time. It was a leadership pressure cooker. And for those of you who are in ministry at that time, especially, it had a nuanced kind of bit to it. It was just really difficult. But I'll tell you what, I need to learn those lessons. And I wonder in Joseph's story, again, Joseph's story is much more dramatic than my own, but I wonder in Joseph's story if there were lessons along the way. I'm sure there were, of lessons that he had to learn. The lessons I had to learn were humility, caring for people, pastoring people. We had baptism, marriages, we had COVID deaths, I counseled a lot of couples, and then there was operations budgets and all the fun things as well, and it was an honor to serve. And it was not a sure thing, but there was this tension also of coming back to DISHER. And so my time back to DISHER is a blessing. I love serving in the role that I do. I love our team and doing these kinds of things. And so I applied, and through a long process was selected for the role I'm currently in. And I just believe that all of those things, just like Joseph, that leaders are formed in leading. Leaders are formed in leading. So that's a little bit of my story, and I'd love to just, as a little coda to this, give you a couple of things I learned along the way, and then we'll talk a little bit about steward leadership. So here's just some lessons along the way. Learning is the key to renewal. So if there's something that I learned through the time is just, man, when you go from technical things, being able to work on different projects over and over, all kinds of different organizations, and then through church and sitting with people who are going through crises, learning is key. And I love this one to Edison. It says, the way the world goes round, the young push ahead, the old stand back. I hope I'll always stand with the young. So I hope I always have that learning mindset. Another one here, there's always something deeper going on. So without question, whenever there's something that doesn't seem right, there's always something deeper going on. And how do you shepherd and care for people through something else going on? So that growth and comfort can't coexist. And then obviously cultivating wisdom and humility, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Tim Keller here at the end as well. And then I'll finally give you one other little nugget around path and vocation and my own story. This is something at DISHER. This is one of our values, our culture characteristics. And this was almost mentioned in a few of the other talks as well, but culture characteristic of finding out what you love, finding what you're good at, what the world needs, and what someone will pay for. This is just a really helpful thing to go, you're not always going to get it right. And so even in my church time as a pastor, I didn't always get it right. I didn't always love what I was doing. But life's a journey. Life's a journey. And about trusting the story, that's how you can make a difference, is being right where your feet are planted, like Travis said, and trusting the story along the way. So with that, I want to talk a little bit more and give you a framework for how I think we can live out steward leadership, how we can live out and trust in this story together. So, steward leadership versus servant leadership. So you've heard servant leadership today, and I want to just give a little bit of a nuance of what this means and how I interpret it. Steward leadership is a little bit broader. It's a little bit broader than servant leadership. And Joseph, as I said, he was leading as a steward. And 100 years ago, if we were in a room like this, and I said, so-and-so was living as a steward, we would have known what that meant. We would have actually known and had a better grasp of what it meant to lead as a steward, because it was a profession. It was a profession, when there were trains running, maybe there was somebody on a farm, they wouldn't be the head manager, they'd be the steward of the farm. They'd be the steward of the train. They would take care of things, they would make sure things were protected on a farm, they would make sure that the crops were coming in, that the staff was growing, and that's what Joseph was. He was a steward. He was the chief steward of the land. So to put a definition to it, maybe, a steward, I can't read that screen, so I'm going to read over here. A steward is responsible for administering, managing, and growing assets, often not their own assets, and that's key. Wisely, humbly, and with a larger purpose in mind. So put it together then. What's a steward leader? And I would guess that as I explain it, that this is going to resonate with a lot of you. A steward leader is a servant leadership of resources with accountability to owners. And that accountability to owners is really key. Really key. So I want to talk a little bit about that. It's probably best to talk through this story. Since you guys were so fast on the Joseph one, you knew that story. I'm not going to talk through all of this story, but you know this story. It's the parable of the talents, right? Give me some head nods, right? Parable of the talents. So an owner goes away on a long journey. He calls his stewards, literally, that's what the word was. He calls his stewards together, and he gives each according to their ability. To the one, he gives $5,000, $2,000, $1,000. And we know the story. The first one doubles the money, invests it. Second one doubles the money, invests it. And when the owner comes back, the third one, they give it to him, well done, good and faithful servant. And the last one, what did the last one do? He buried it. He buried it. He said, Master, I know that you're a hard man. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. Down to the last cent. And the owner, he was furious. And this is a little paraphrase. That's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, then why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers. At least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the 1,000 and give it to the one who risks the most and throw him out. With that story in mind, what does steward leadership really look like? What does it really look like? So here's 4 postures, okay? 4 postures of what it means, what it looks like. You have to take on that identity. You have to take on the identity of living as a steward leader. And before I go back, let me just give credit where credit's due. Some of this is my own. Some of it is also from Kent Wilson and R. Scott Roden. So some of their work is a little bit academic. This is my own translation of some of their work. So if you want to look up more, this would be the place to go on this idea, okay? So 4 postures. Identify as a steward. So this is literally not just playing a role, but really taking on the identity of what it means to be a steward. So for a moment, think about what it means to lead from that mental space of stewardship. What does it mean to really put yourself in that place? So wherever you're at, whatever role you're in, there's someone that is an owner, right? There's someone that's an owner. So being able to understand that is really important, and being able to put yourself in those shoes of what does it look like to protect and grow the assets of the owner is key. Our word steward comes from an Old English word that really means household protector. So recognizing that when you're in charge of others, you're really in their charge. You're really in their charge. I'll say that again. When you're in charge of others, you're really in their charge. You're the protector of the household. So when you think back to Joseph's story, he was in charge. He was the protector of first the wealthy man's household and then the entire nation of Egypt. He was a steward first and foremost. He took that identity on. Second, have you ever seen a moving truck follow a hearse? Anyone ever seen that? I told you the jokes would keep coming. They're not very good jokes, but they're coming. No, of course we've not ever seen a moving truck follow a hearse. You can't take it with you. You can't take it with you. The second question and the third question are a little bit more poignant. Raise of hands. Have you ever taken over something from someone else? Raise of hands. Taken over a role, position. Good. Another raise of hands. Do you plan to hand over the thing you're currently leading now to someone else? Everybody. Right? That's why it matters. That's why it matters. You need to understand that you are in charge of a role, a position, of assets, and they need to be taken care of. That's really hard. So you have to have that posture. You have to understand in what kind of condition are the things that you're in charge of, what kind of condition are they going to be handed over? Oftentimes with my leadership team at DISHER, I'll say, and I'll remind us about this idea of stewardship, and I'll say, who not in this room do we need to be thinking about? And I don't mean the other people already at DISHER. I'm thinking about 5, 10 years from now. And that's a different way to look at it. Who are the people that are not even here that we need to be taken care of in our decisions? That's a hard way to look at it. And more down to earth, DISHER is an ESOP too, and so I have a lot of stakeholders to report to. And some of you, maybe just a quick note on this too. Some of you are owners of a business. Some of you are the owners. You're not off the hook. You're not off the hook. Because ultimately we respond to a greater owner, right? When we get to heaven, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that when we get to heaven, if we're believers in this room, when we get to heaven and we see the Lord face to face, and he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I don't think it's a coincidence that those are the same words that were shared in the talents. I don't think it's a coincidence. So, having that mindset, understanding ownership, and I'm going to spend some time on this, okay? But understanding what those assets are is really, really important. Steward leaders are expected to protect and grow those assets and resources in their charge. I call them capitals. So there's 6 here, and I'm going to talk through each one of these, okay? First one, financial capital. What's financial capital? Give me an example. Just yell it out. Come on. Cash flow, profit and loss, right? Balance sheets, pretty easy to understand. It's all of those things, really the one that was outlined in the story of the stewards. It's here's an investment, go double it. It's the one that we're very familiar with, very, very familiar with. The world is familiar with, of capital, financial capital. So it's those profit and loss statements, capital expenditures. Why does it matter? For each of these, I want to define it, give you some reasons why it matters, maybe ask some questions. So why it matters, it's really easy to measure. So that's why oftentimes when we're capturing and thinking about stewardship, we start at this one because it's really easy to measure, but it can't be the only measure, okay? Examples of stewarding it well, maybe it's managing those margins responsibly without losing sight of the long-term mission, choosing investments wisely, balancing risk. So I think we kind of have an intuitive feel of what it means to manage these capitals, these assets. But then the questions to ask, and I'll ask one question, what are we sacrificing in the pursuit of maybe profit and growth? And is it worth it, right? So how do you balance mission and profit and growth? That's a hard thing to think through as you're protecting and growing financial capital and assets. Okay, second one. If I can get it to click. Physical capital. Another one that, as we go, they're going to get a little fuzzier. Okay, another one. This is your time, health, facilities, equipment, your capital expenditures, your physical environment, the energy you consume, your resources. And it matters because you can buy financial capital, but you can't buy back wasted time. And you can't buy people. Okay? It matters to take care of that. So an example of stewarding it well, maybe it's well-maintained facilities, things like that. Maybe it's making sure your team is taken care of. And the question to ask on this one, as you say, hey, how am I protecting and growing this asset, is are we guarding, for instance, our time as fiercely as we guard our money? Are we guarding our time as the influential people that you might be, a leader that you might be, whatever influence you have in your organization, are you guarding your time just as much as you're guarding your financial capital? All right, third one, influential capital. This is your brand, your reputation, your position, your communication. This is your voice in the marketplace. Voice in the marketplace. Whether that's a ministry, whether that's a church, whether that's a business. What does it look like to have a brand or presence in the world? What is the world seeing as you lead from a place of faith? What is the world seeing? That influence compounds. People will listen based on what it looks like to have your influence stewarded well. So think about a brand whose messaging might build credibility over decades. Maybe it's something like Lego. Everybody loves Lego, right? I don't know of any Lego controversies, but I tried to choose one that didn't have controversy. Everyone loves Lego. And please don't explain to me some Lego controversy I don't know, okay? But Lego's a brand that's fun. It's an iconic brand. It built credibility over years. We all know the ones that haven't. And we all know the leaders that lose credibility. They lose their influential capital. They're not good stewards of it. Okay, we know that. We know how that happens. So, the question to ask yourself is, are you using influence to serve yourself or to advance the mission? What does it look like? What does it look like? All right, a couple more here. Relational capital. It's a temptation to think about this, maybe. It's funny, the number 3 isn't changing. That's why it threw me off. Okay, relational capital. Travis said people are your greatest asset. So it's this people focus, customers, employers, vendors, mentors, peers. It's all these relationships that you have within the community. And every transaction is rooted in relationship. And so those healthy relationships need to multiply value. And it's hard. It's hard. We're not perfect. We're not perfect. This is a really hard thing to do. It's really hard to lead faithfully and to balance all of these capitals, to balance all of these assets. It's really difficult to do. But it matters because every transaction that we do as leaders, as business leaders, as ministry leaders, is rooted in some kind of relationship. So what does it look like to steward it well? Long-term, an example, if you think of like the best vendor you've ever had, they're actually adding value to you, right? They're probably thinking about trust and costs and making sure that they're providing the very best value they can. Like that's a great relational capital that you want to have. So the question to ask, and I ask our team this quite a bit, is when we're out serving a customer, and we have the privilege, again, of working within a lot of organizations and coming alongside, working on technical problems, leadership problems, maybe talent things. We have a blessing to be able to do that. And oftentimes I'll say, are we actually leaving the customer off better than when we started? And it's a weird question. It's a simple question. We should be asking it all the time. But it's a really poignant one. It's a really thoughtful one to be able to say, did we actually make a difference in a positive way because we were there? Did we make that team better? Did we make the team that we were embedded with, did we make that team better? Not only that, are we making better engineers, but better leaders, better wives, sons, friends, community trustees? Are people better because they worked at DISHER and worked with DISHER? It's a really important question to ask. Two more. Cultural capital. It's the collective beliefs, behaviors that lead to belonging together. It's kind of the way we do things. And that it matters because, as Travis mentioned, I think we all get it here, but it really matters. It really matters. Culture is the soil. Everything else grows out of it. And so how rich is your culture? How nutrient rich is your culture? One interesting thing about Egypt, the place where Joseph lived, and Abram went down to Egypt as well when there was a famine. Jacob went down to Egypt when there was a famine. Is it's still the most fertile soil on earth because of the Nile River Delta. It's where people went in the ancient world. It's where people went during a famine because they had the culture of being able to provide. Egypt did. Now, kind of went south from there, so, take it with a grain of salt, but they had food there, and they always had food because it was the richest soil. So what does it look like to create and to cultivate a soil that leads toward your flourishing as an organization? So what are those stories? Are we actively shaping our culture, or are we just letting it drift? How are you stewarding your culture? Last one here, intellectual capital. This is the knowledge, ideas, creativity, wisdom, systems, strategies, all the things of running the business, of running the organization. It's the renewable energy. The more you share, the more it multiplies. So what's an example of maybe living it well? How do you encourage innovation? How do you encourage creativity? Again, it's a hard thing to do. It has to be really intentional. How do you encourage that? How are you stewarding, protecting, and growing that intellectual capital that you've been called to steward? So are we making space for it or not? So with all of that, I want to ask, which of those capitals are you under-investing in? Which ones are you over-investing in? Which ones are you doing really well? And what does it look like if you're measuring your organization with those 6 capitals in mind as a steward? Because all of us are stewarding something. So what does it look like to do that? Finally, 4th thing on steward leadership, and I'll wrap it up talking about God's story a little bit. Giving it back for a greater purpose. I mentioned our mission statement at DISHER, make a positive difference. Leading by Design. We want to help West Michigan become the hotbed of the best leaders in the country. What is it for you? What is that mission for you? What's the purpose for you in your organization? If you don't have it clarified, clarify it. But it has to be brought back to a greater purpose. It has to be brought back and given back to a greater purpose. So for Joseph, he's protecting and growing. He's the chief steward. He's protecting and growing those assets. And ultimately, he knew that his purpose was providing for the nation, but what he didn't know at that time was also providing for the future of his family. What's your greater purpose? So there's a summary slide for it. Think about that. Take on that responsibility of a steward. Understand ownership. Think about those capitals. And it's important that we all do this together as a community. Last thing, making a difference. Making a difference through trusting God's story. So I shared a little bit about my story. I've been thinking about this a little bit, and this is sort of the best thing I could come up with in terms of a picture for what it looks like to live in the midst of your story in God's story. Again, think about Joseph and all the things that happened to Joseph. I love this picture here because God's purposes for us are often hidden in the tensions and the difficulty and the shaping and the forming. And so for Joseph, he was chiseled. I don't mean he was like ripped or anything. Like he was, as I said that, we don't know that. He could have been. We don't know that. But he was beaten, right? I mean, he was in setbacks and difficulties and tensions. And when I think about Michelangelo's David, think about that. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that statue, that sculpture. It's amazing. When you think about that, I always wondered, like, how did he know when it was done? How did he know it was done? Did he think it was perfect, or did he think it was complete? Like, for those of you that are artists, I'm not an artist. For those of you that are artists, how do you know when a picture or a painting is done? I imagine that's really hard to understand. It's really hard to get a handle on. But I think, I wrote this down. I said, one more hammer or chisel on Michelangelo's David. One more chisel on it. And that sculpture is ruined. One more chisel. One less, it's not complete. I think that's what it's like to live in God's story. I think that's what it's like to live in God's story. I'm still in the midst of the chiseling. I want to end here sharing kind of a longer quote from what it means to live in God's story. It's a little bit of a longer quote. It's from, I put a Tim Keller quote up there earlier. He would have been 75 last month. He passed away a couple years ago from pancreatic cancer, but he's had an influence on me over the years as I've tried to humbly navigate my own story and God's story in the midst of it. So here's a longer quote from Tim Keller, and he's talking about Joseph. He says, God is going to overrule, this is from 2004, in a sermon he gave. God's going to overrule and work and weave in even the worst things into an ultimate good. But in the end, though, the perfect example of this is Joseph. Joseph is one of many brothers, and his dad, Jacob, was utterly poisoning that family. You ever think about that? Jacob was utterly poisoning that family. He was destroying that family system because he was favoring Joseph over the rest of his brothers, and Joseph was on his way to becoming proud and to becoming cruel and to becoming hollow and shallow, and he was on his way to being wrecked, and his brothers were becoming murderously bitter. And of course, we know what happened in that story. The brothers threw Joseph into a pit, sold him into slavery. He was in Egypt as a slave. He was accused of seducing Potiphar's wife, thrown into a dungeon. And if you read the story of Joseph, you'll see that years go by over and over and over, and he's thrown into these dark pits, and he cries out to God, and it's no answer. God seems to be absent. When we read that story, just interjecting a little bit, when we read the story of Joseph, it's years and years and years and years of what had to be silence. No answer. Year after year after year, one thing goes wrong after another, and then another thing goes wrong, and there's slavery, and there's injustice, and there's screaming and fighting and running and crying, and everything's wrong. And years later, it becomes obvious that only because of these bad things in his story, in God's story working through Joseph. Only because of those bad things, Joseph becomes a man of greatness and he becomes the chief steward. His brothers and his family are completely healed psychologically, and in the end, his family is saved from starvation, as is most of the rest of the world, all because of those bad things. Only in the end, though. And that's the reason why Joseph is able to say in his famous summary, which is almost an exact quote of Proverbs 16:3, even though it happened earlier, when he looks at his brothers with tears in his eyes and he says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So I wonder, as we think about things in our lives, in difficulties and difficult seasons, what does it mean to have things that were meant for evil that God is going to use for good? That means never, ever, ever think that God's not working, no matter how much it seems like he's absent. And at the same time, never, ever, ever think you're going to be able to figure out for a long time exactly what he's up to. It's having the faith, it's having the hope to trust in your own story, trust in God's story, and to take on that steward leadership posture and to be faithful with where God's called you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You had mentioned that during COVID, it was a leadership pressure cooker. And I'm just really thankful that that's ended, and it's super easy to lead our organizations now. So very, very thankful for that. I'm thrilled just listening to you because you've given me a new vocabulary for a thing that I've actually been struggling with for years or maybe a decade, or sometimes it's a day-by-day struggle. The idea of steward leadership is incredible because for the Christian, there's a journey, right? I call it the mine, the not mine, and then the mine again. The mine is I've earned this. It's mine. I'm going to do with it what I want. I own this resource. I own this comfort, this money, this time, this capital, whatever. It's mine. And then you do the right Christian thing, which is this isn't mine. This is the Lord's, and I'll give it back to him. And you do maybe the overly Christian thing of whatever happens will be as God wills. And that sounds very good, but it's not the end of the journey yet. And that's step 4, using it for a greater purpose. Taking ownership of that. That's the mine again, which is God has given me this. And I have to have accountability. I have to have responsibility over it. And he is expecting a return on that investment. What a precious thing I've been given. And if I do I grew up Baptist, so forgive me, fellow Baptists in the room. But if I do the overly Baptist thing of, it'll be as God wills, and frozen chosen, I don't know. That's not moving to that step 4. That's not moving on to steward leadership. So thank you for giving me the vocabulary to articulate that better than I've ever heard. So thank you so much.